Now back to the show. This is The Law Show on CL 650.
Remember the days of the old schoolyard. We used to laugh a lot.
Cat Stevens, nice. All right, I'm Zach Spencer. This is The Law Show on CL 650. Today we're talking about school trips, and we're joined today by Joe Murphy and Jeff Neuenberg from Murphy Batista in downtown Vancouver, talking about what you should do when the form comes from the school, and this happens throughout the year. I find it happens more towards the end of the year. There's a lot of school trips jammed in June. But Jeff, when the form comes in from the school, from the teacher saying, hey, we're going to go to Playland, it's the last week of school, and then the weather's nice, and we want to go to Playland for the day. What should you be looking for, and what kind of questions and red flags, and then how should you proceed?
Yeah, so I've been on one of those field trips before. Ideally, the forms that come in that the parents get should break down, and so that should break down the risks involved in going on these sorts of trips, and what's hoped to be gained in terms of what the educational purpose of the trip is, so that parents can make an educated decision with all the information. So that doesn't always happen. The forms aren't always as complete as they should be, and if that's the case, there's no reason not to contact the school for some more information. But ideally, there'll be that sort of information so that parents can make an educated decision.
Now, typically when you go on one of these trips, it's like herding cats. You've got 30 kids in a class, or sometimes 2 classes, and there's a couple of parents there maybe with them. But at Playland, they're just going to scatter for 3 or 4 hours. So how do you say to what do you call the teacher? You call the principal, and you say, well, who's going to be watching Johnny or Sally during the Playland trip to make sure that they're not going to get into any trouble?
Well, Zach, that's a question with every trip, is what's the level of supervision, and what are the supervisors going to do? If you take kids and you send them to a swimming pool, I really think there should be one supervisor for every 2 or 3 kids, because, again, when you get near water, the danger level goes way up. When you're going to Playland, the question for me is, if I'm a parent, and this is based on having done these awful cases where these kids got so badly hurt, is how are you getting from the school to Playland? Who's driving? It used to be very common for buses to be hired to take the kids there and back, and it's a school bus, and while they don't have seat belts, they're pretty safe. But to cut costs, that's become quite rare, and instead it's parents driving. So the question is, what experience do these parents have as a driver? We see new drivers out on the road, and sometimes we wonder how they ever got their license.
Yes, we swear at them.
Is one of these new drivers going to be driving my kid to and from this place? How are the drivers screened? How many kids are going to be in each car? What insurance does this person have who's going to be driving my kid? So that's just getting there and back. When it gets there, what's the supervision? I think with Playland, they just say to the kids, stick together and don't miss
talk to strangers. Yeah,
and you got to be back here at 3:30 or 4, and God help you if you're not. But how can you supervise kids in Playland? You can't. So the parents got to understand that the supervision that's going to happen in Playland or on a ski trip or on some of these other trips is going to be sketchy. So you got to know that if you're going to consent to your kid going somewhere, as you would if they came to you and said, listen, I want to go with my friends, we're going to go to Cultus Lake. You might say, okay, who's going to be driving and how are you going to be there and what are you going to do there? With the school, it's the kids, while there's a consent to be signed, oftentimes there isn't really an option to pass on the trip and say, no, he's not going or she's not going.
Yeah, because then somebody else has got to look after the child that day in another class or what have you. So here's an example. I get asked by my kids, my oldest now is in high school, but my youngest is still in elementary school, and at the school they attend, the older grades go on a camping trip every May or June for 3 days, 2 nights, and I get roped into being one of the parent volunteers. So it's me and a bunch of grade 6 or 7 boys that I have to listen to all their terrible jokes all night. But I mean, what is it that you need to ask? I'm there, obviously, so I can watch my own child. But what do you need to ask when you're going away to camp for 3 days? There's going to be water, there's going to be kayaking, there's going to be rock climbing, there's going to be archery, there's going to be slingshots. I mean, these are just some of the activities that the children are involved in. So what do you ask?
Well, the problem is that the activities are so varied, it's really difficult to know where to start. Going there and back, if kids are going to be doing swimming, the school should make sure each of these kids is an adequate swimmer. Mm-hmm. In the case I did where the 17-year-old boy drowned, he couldn't swim. And he and a group were taken to this lake near Whistler and essentially unsupervised. And the lake had a gradual drop-off and then a total drop-off. And he obviously wandered too far from shore and dropped off, couldn't swim.
So he thought he was waiting.
He drowned.
Yeah.
So in that case, the school should make sure these kids can swim before they take them to a lake. You talk about rock climbing. We have a case in the office of a 15, 16-year-old girl who goes on one of these hiking trips with her class. It's 3 or 4 or 5 days long. They're climbing up a very steep rock face, and one of the kids in front of her steps on and dislodges a rock. The rock bounces down and hits this girl in the head, and she's quite badly hurt. And when we talk to people who are into rock climbing, they say, well, when you're rock climbing, you spread the group out. Mm-hmm. So that if there is a rock knocked out by someone above you, you can at least see it and probably avoid it. So there was something really simple, and I don't think the school there ever thought that was something they should do, saying, okay, we're all going on the hike, but there's got to be 10 meters between each of the people. So, there's just so many things. But again, the educational value should justify the risks, but the parents should understand the risks. And I think if a school's done the same trip year after year after year, they tend to get fairly complacent in assessing what the risks are.
So are we just getting too paranoid now? Or are we just getting to the point now where you're going to paralyze somebody with fear and say, well, you're not going on the school trip. I don't have all the answers. There's water. There's risk. What's the answer to the parents that are listening today?
Kids do risky activities, and the older they get, the more risks they take. Boys generally take more risks than girls. These things happen, but it's just the parents having the knowledge so they understand it. So when the kid goes on the trip, the parent can say, okay, here's what I want you to do. In one case, the parents could have and would have said to the kid, stay out of the snowboard park, but they didn't even know there was such a thing as a snowboard park with these huge jumps, huge.
So in that case where you talked about the snowboarder breaking his neck, and you said the mountain was at fault, the school was at fault, and the student was at fault. So what was the what was the fault with the student? Just taking part in a risky activity where they didn't have expertise to do it?
I think trying something that he probably shouldn't have tried, even though the other kids he was with were trying the same thing, and he was more athletic than the other kids. That's the only thing, because other than that, he did everything he was told to do. Stay with the other kids, you stay in bounds, and be sure to be back at 3:30 for the bus. So he was keeping all the rules, but the only complaint could have been that he tried something that he shouldn't have.
Well, Jeff, you know that when you're with your friends and the testosterone kicks in and, hey, I'm going to go off this jump and you should try it too, that voice of mom and dad in the back of your head saying, now don't do anything stupid, just evaporates, and kids will be kids and boys will be boys, and these sorts of things happen.
Yeah, but we kind of know that sort of thing happens, right? Children aren't expected to, obviously they shouldn't take the risks that they do, but when these sorts of things happen with school trips and that sort of thing, the school is stepping in there into the position of a parent or the responsible adult. So they need to make sure that boys aren't boys, that these sorts of things that they don't happen, that there's that adult there saying, hey, this might be dangerous, don't be doing that. So it's a big responsibility on our schools and our educators that they take to look after their our kids every day.
And was that the case? Was there an adult supervising these children in this instance?
On paper, yes. In reality, no.
Right.
He said to the kids, the main teacher, there was 3 teachers, but they all sort of scattered and went off skiing themselves. One of the interesting comparables, Zach, is most high schools have a rule that kids can't be playing in the gymnasium unless the teacher's present. Mm-hmm. And that makes sense because you say, well, what are these kids going to be doing? They've got all sorts of equipment. Is a school trip much different than kids in a gymnasium? Well, the answer is they need the supervision, they need the rules. And if that's the rule for the gymnasium, then maybe these teachers should be with these kids. In the case I was talking about, there was about 15 kids together. So it wasn't unreasonable to say to those 15, one of the teachers say, okay, come on, I'm going to come to the snowboard park with you. And, and if you're doing something I think's really stupid or risky, I'm going to say, don't do that.
All right, we're talking about school trips and what you should be asking, what you should be looking for. Joe Murphy is with me, a lawyer at Murphy Battista, with one of his junior lawyers, Jeff Neuenberg, also from Murphy Battista. And we'll continue this conversation. I have a question about driving children around in the car, not only for school trips, but for other activities. When we come back next on The Law Show.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CL 650.